It's really wonderful to see you here, and welcome to our 10th annual symposium. So I have a question first, though. How many people have been here for all 10 symposiums? Wow, okay. Well, thank you for your dedication and for being here. How many people, this is the first time they've ever been here? Yeah? Wow, okay. Well, I like that. We've got a lot of new people. So this is our annual showcase and symposium where we bring together people, where we have an opportunity for an informed discussion about some of the most challenging energy issues that we face in the world today. And the way we organize this meeting is we have stage-setting talks. We'll have a panel discussion, in-depth discussion about the role of the world's largest industries and transforming our energy system to one with lower carbon emissions. We then have very detailed technical presentations, so if you love equations and biological charts and so forth, you can immerse yourself in that. And at the same time, we have a set of tutorials for those of you who want to learn about some new topic in energy. And finally, part of this conference is being here all together, having the opportunity to talk. And you'll notice we've set you up at tables, and we hope that in the downtime that you take this opportunity to meet some of the neighbors sitting at your table and create a larger community of people all devoted to our cause, which is to have an energy system that is plentiful, affordable, accessible, but at the same time with low carbon emissions. So I was thinking about this 10 years. 10 years is always a milestone kind of a thing, 10 years of our symposium. And I thought, what an extraordinary decade of progress that we've had over this last 10 years. And it's easy to in our day-to-day lives, bemoan the fact that the progress might not be as fast. But if you look back 10 years, I think you'll agree with me that it has been an extraordinary time. And some of the examples I like to point to are, for example, the cost of PV modules. If we look back to 2004, the modules themselves cost about $3 a watt. This made for extremely expensive electricity that could only be achieved either in very exotic applications or with very, very large government subsidies. Today, the price of a photovoltaic module is only about 70 cents per watt. And we've successfully moved down what we call this learning curve, which says the more we build, the more we deploy, the lower the cost. And this has been really an extraordinary accomplishment through industry and academics around the world. And just like the silicon modules have had this dramatic improvement in costs, so too have thin-film solar devices. So as a consequence, and actually as part of driving this decrease in price, we've had an extraordinary increase in the amount of photovoltaics that have been installed around the world. If we look back to 2004, we had about, 5,000 megawatts of installed capacity, not very much at all. And then today, we've had a 40 times increase where we have over 140,000 megawatts of installed photovoltaic capacity. And I think you could argue that any industry that had achieved this sustained growth rate over a decade would be extremely pleased with that outcome. So if we look at wind, we see a similar success story. And here in California, many of us who grew up in this area got used to driving through our Altamont Pass. And this is a place where wind turbines were installed long ago, and most of the time we just saw them sitting there doing nothing. But what in fact has happened through advances in technology, through companies like GE and others, these turbines now perform extremely well. They're often the low-cost source of electricity when you compare it to other options. And likewise, we've seen a tremendous growth, year over year on average for the last decade of 23% growth. Again, an extraordinary accomplishment. But the story is not just about renewables. The story is also about fossil fuels. It used to be a foregone conclusion that we had reached peak production of oil and gas in the United States, and we were forever going to be on a downward curve. And instead, what happened in reality is that some entrepreneurial folks decided to not listen to everyone who said that there were no more opportunities. And they discovered that actually the combination of two technologies, horizontal drilling combined with hydraulic fracturing, that made it so that what are called host rocks, where the hydrocarbons are actually formed in place, that those are now a tremendous source of natural gas. And natural gas has about half the emissions of coal when it produces electricity. So it can provide, again, a bridge to a lower carbon energy future. So again, the story is not just about electricity, about power. It's also about transportation. And if we think in 2004, I remember that if you drove around California, we just started to see Priuses in particular on the road. And you know, when a Prius went by, we went, oh wow, there's a hybrid electric car. That's really interesting. We were selling about 50,000 cars, and there were only 3 that you could buy. You could buy a Honda, you could buy a Toyota, or you could buy an Escape, a Ford Escape, and that was it. Well, fast forward now, 10 years later, almost 500,000 cars that are being sold are hybrid electric cars, along with all the attendant improvements in the efficiency of transportation. And not only have we increased the number of cars sold, but you can actually find today that there are over 70 different hybrid electric cars. So this technology with improved efficiency has significantly penetrated the transportation market. And who would have thought that we would actually have electric cars driving around? And not only do we have electric cars, but we have electric cars that people really want to buy. Some of the most desirable, sexiest cars in the world are actually electric cars. I don't think we could have imagined that. Again, a decade of extraordinary progress. And even technologies that people have decided are perhaps too costly forever are starting to make inroads. Last week, a new carbon capture power plant, a coal-fired power plant with carbon capture and storage, actually turned on commercial scale, 120 megawatts in Saskatchewan, Canada. It's producing about 1 million tons a year of CO2. That CO2 is being used for enhanced oil recovery, but that CO2 stays in the ground when you put it there, and the part that comes back, you put it back in the ground. So a real milestone, a commercial project. So I met with him last week, and we said, well, how did the economics on this pencil out? You know, how'd you do this? This was an expensive project. And they said, well, we're here in Saskatchewan. We've got a lot of low-grade coal, brown coal. We're not very desirable to sell. We want energy security. We want stable electricity prices. And when we look at this project, and we need low emissions. We understand, we get it, that we're going to have to reduce emissions. They decided that when they looked at over a 40-year economic lifetime of this project, that this was the best option, and it helped shield them against potential volatility in fuel prices. So many, many exciting accomplishments. So maybe we should all go home, rest on our laurels, but of course we know our job is not done. If we look at around the world, the demand for energy services is steadily increasing at about 2.1% a year. So over this past decade, 20% increase in the amount of energy that we need to provide for the global population, driven in part or largely by the emergent middle class associated with rapidly industrializing countries. And there's no reason that this is going to stop anytime soon. These people need energy for industry, for improving quality of life. And the other side of this story about need for more energy deals with the 1.2 billion people who don't have any electricity today at all. And that's really a staggering number. If you think about India alone, in India, there are about 300 million people with no electricity. That's the same amount of people as are in the United States, in India alone, that have no electricity. And if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, it's twice that amount, 600 million people without electricity. And I think what these charts really belie is that when you go to these countries and you experience the quality of the electricity that they do have, even in those places with electricity, it's extremely poor quality. You couldn't run a business on it. You can't run a schoolhouse on it because it's so intermittent and variable. So people have to resort to things like backup generators. So I think this 1.2 billion people lacking access to electricity is really a large underestimate of the unmet need for high quality electricity services. And coal. Coal is the fuel with the highest CO2 emissions per unit of energy that's available to us. And I think in 2004, many people might have believed that coal would begin to decline or at least stabilize. But the reality is coal is the fastest growing source of energy in the world, growing at around 3.7% per year. And resulting in a significant increase not only in the use of coal and the air pollution associated with that, but of course the CO2 emissions. And finally, on the technology front, I think we can all be very excited about wind power and solar PV. The costs are getting to be very competitive. With PV, we can anticipate that it's going to continue to decline as the industry scales. But at some point, as we already know, that we're going to have to deal with the intermittency and the variability of these resources. You know, humans, we have a fairly predictable and steady use pattern of electricity as indicated by those red curves. But those blue curves and those yellow curves are indicative of the variability of the resources. And it's very hard to make match the demand with the supply when you have to deal with this intermittency. So I think our next big challenge is how do we integrate these resources and how do we incorporate storage and how do we develop cost-effective storage technologies that will allow us to take better advantage of these intermittent and variable resources. And of course, really the main reason we're here is our goal is to begin to turn the tide on carbon dioxide emissions. And I've been involved in this clean energy challenge for a long time. And I think back 10 years ago, and I remember we used to say, well, CO2 concentrations are approaching 380 parts per million compared to pre-industrial levels of 280 parts per million. But now, what are we saying? We're at 400 parts per million. So this relentless increase in carbon dioxide emissions has continued unabated. So again, our work is not done. So with that backdrop, I'd like to frame what we here at GCEP will do and give you some sort of tantalizing examples of the work that you're going to hear about from our faculty and our students and our postdocs. So if we look at what is the goal of GCEP, it's really fourfold. The first is to lower the cost and increase the efficiency of renewable electricity. The second is to develop scalable and cost-effective renewable fuels. And when we say renewable fuels, we're not only talking about biofuels, but as you're going to hear, there are real innovations in making fuels without having to rely on biology. And you'll hear more about that. The third goal is to lower the cost and increase the efficiency of both fuel cells and batteries, both core technologies that will be critical in the transition to a lower carbon economy. And finally, fossil fuels are the majority of our energy system today. I think many would agree that if we don't find a way to decarbonize those fossil fuels, that is, use fossil fuels while lowering the emissions, it's going to be very difficult to achieve a transition as quickly and as large as we need in terms of reducing emissions. So that's what really we're all about here at GCEP. So just a couple of examples of the kind of thing we do in the area of renewable electricity. You know, I talked about all the good news with regard to photovoltaics, and the prices have come down and they're going to continue to come down. But what we're finding now is that a significant fraction of the cost of a photovoltaic is now not buying the module, but it's actually installing it. It's what we call the balance of systems. And that's now becoming the majority of cost. So if we want to reduce this balance of system cost, one way to do it is make more efficient modules that can be smaller so that the balance of systems can be smaller. So the question is what could you do? There are many options for improving the efficiency, but one that we're working on here with Hema Karanadasa and Mike McGeehee is to make a tandem cell where we take silicon, and on top of that, we put a perovskite solar cell. So instead of a typical efficiency that you might get of a 16% or so, our goal would be to have a 25% efficient cell by making this tandem cell available. Okay, what about the area of renewable fuels? I mentioned that we're interested in being able to make fuels without biology. So you might be saying, well, how would you do that? Well, the idea is you take some kind of low carbon electricity, renewable energy, or it could be nuclear power even, and you take that and you combine CO2 and water, and if you have appropriate catalysts, basically materials, you can then actually synthesize fuels, and those fuels could be used for the transportation sector, or alternatively, you could use those fuels as a form of energy storage where you could later generate electricity from them. So the key to this is to develop catalysts that make these reactions efficient and selective. And Matt Cannon and his students have actually had an excellent discovery where they found that copper, the catalyst copper, can be formulated in such a way to be much more efficient than a typical copper catalyst would be. They have what they call oxide-derived copper, and it has a special morphology that allows you to very selectively and efficiently convert carbon dioxide, water, and energy and electricity into fuels. As a matter of fact, they can produce ethanol with 55% efficiency compared to the former catalyst, which was about 5% efficient. So just another example of what's next. In the area of batteries, and what we're looking for is we want a battery with a very high energy density so that it can be sort of has as much energy stored on your car as you can with your gasoline tank. Okay, so we want to do that. And we also want them to last a really long time. You don't want your battery to die halfway through, 2 or 3 years after you buy your car. So one opportunity for increasing the energy is to use silicon as the anode material in that battery, and it can have about 10 times the energy density of a graphite, for example, anode in a battery today. So that's fantastic. But the problem is when you load up that silicon with the lithium, that it actually begins to break apart. And that makes it so the battery doesn't last very long. Okay, so you've solved one problem, but you created another. Well, what can you do about it? So Yi Shui and Zhenan Bao together have gotten the idea of a self-healing battery. And so you think about, well, what would self-healing be? Well, think about our skin, right? If we get a cut in our skin can self-heal. So the idea here is to create a polymer so that as this battery cycles, loads and unloads, that it can actually heal itself, retain its properties to both store and transport electricity. And if we could do this, we could have a battery that would allow us to have the equivalent performance of a gasoline engine. And finally, in the area of CO2 capture, I gave you some good news. I said, wow, we actually have the first of a kind carbon capture on a coal plant with CO2 storage. But the problem is the capture is 2 to 3 times more expensive than we would like it to be. So we cannot anticipate that incremental improvements in today's technologies is going to get us to this 2 to 3 times reduction. They're already fairly optimized. So we need to find radically new approaches. So Jen Wilcox, Zhenan Bao, and Dan Stack got the idea, well, what about if we look to nature, and in particular to an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase? This is an enzyme that both can take CO2 out of the air and put it into water, and it can do that reversible reaction as well. And it does it extremely fast and extremely efficiently. So why couldn't we harness the same biology, the same chemistry that occurs in these biological systems for carbon capture? And if we could do that, we could reduce the energy penalty. So it takes energy to capture CO2. We could reduce that energy penalty perhaps from 30% down to about 10%. So These are just some examples of the exciting work that you're going to hear about. So we're not finished, of course. We have lots more work to do, and I just want to give you a quick preview of some of the things coming up in the next round of proposals that we've selected to fund. One is extremely affordable solar photovoltaics. If you had a completely different way, electrodeposition, for example, could you make these so that in the developing world we could have, just like we had a cell phone revolution in the developing world, could we have a photovoltaic revolution in the developing world that quickly could raise people out of energy poverty? Another area, a core technology, is catalysts. Today, if we think about fuel cells, we use very expensive catalysts, and that's one of the big cost drivers. It's also one of the big energetic inputs to make that. And so we have very active search, an in silico search for catalysts, which then we can synthesize and we can test. So very important core technology that actually cuts across many of the things we do. Another area, very important, is the possibility that we're going to need negative emissions. So many of the studies today, the integrated assessment studies, suggest that we're going to need some amount of negative emissions in order to be able to control the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And the question is well, how would you do it? So there are some folks who are working on basically machines that will separate CO2 from the atmosphere, but those are incredibly expensive. Today's estimates, it could cost anywhere from $500 to $1,000 per ton of CO2. I think that's crazy. So what we're looking at as an alternative is the combination of bioenergy together with carbon capture and storage as a way of achieving negative emissions. So if we grow plants, they take carbon dioxide out of the air, we convert them to electricity, we capture that CO2 and sequester it underground. So more to come on that. And then finally, as we think about heavy-duty trucking in particular, this is a growing sector of the economy. It's extremely important for commerce. And if we can find ways to improve the efficiency of that heavy-duty commerce, that would be highly beneficial. So one of the things we're starting to work on is combining the best of an internal combustion engine with the best of a fuel cell. Each operates in certain ranges really highly efficiently. Well, imagine a fuel cell internal combustion engine that could achieve 70% efficiency. This would be tremendous. So I just want to give you a couple more highlights of things that you can anticipate over the course of this. So we have fantastic plenary speakers. I'm sure you've all noticed that. We'll start out with Chris Field, he is the head of Working Group 2 of the IPCC. As you all know, the report just came out recently, and Chris Field will be talking about that. We'll then be having a talk by Chad Holliday, who's on the board of directors of Bank of America and been one of the real champions of sustainability in industry. And I'm really looking forward to that. And from across the bay, we have Dan Kamen from Berkeley. And he, again, has been one of the real champions and pioneers of trying to figure out how can we raise people from energy poverty. And then finally, we have Thomas Friedman, the columnist, author, entertainer extraordinaire, and he's going to be talking about the world is fast. I have no idea what that means, but he'll tell us all about it, and that'll be a lot of fun. So those are our plenary discussions. We also have a panel discussion. If we think about, in this room, we have some of the world's biggest, most capable, most technologically advanced companies. What is the role of these leading industries in the clean energy transition? And for that conversation, we have Arun Majumdar together with Pete Trellenberg and John Woolard. So interesting conversation. And then the stars of this show are actually all of our faculty and students who talk in great detail about their work. So we have 4 technical sessions, and so this is for people who really want to dive into the details, this and the poster session. So if you are interested in these topics, come, you'll hear great talks, but we want something for everybody here. Maybe you don't want to see, chemical equations or something. So, and maybe you don't know what thermoelectrics are. So in parallel to our main technical sessions, we offer tutorials. We call them our 101 series. And it's an hour-and-a-half sort of immersion, learn about the nomenclature, learn about the fundamental ideas behind these technologies in an accessible way. So we have one on wind, net energy analysis, a form of life cycle analysis, thermoelectrics, and synthetic fuels. So that will be your choice. For the students in the audience, a lot of them have 9 o'clock classes right now. So anyway, we do have our student distinguished lectures. For me, this is always a highlight of the GCEP Symposium. We have a poster session and reception, so please go to that. The students prepare extensively for that. We also have a lunch, a networking lunch for our sponsors and the students to talk about what it's like to work in your companies and what kind of job opportunities are there. And then, especially for the students, we have a social event for them. So for the GCEP Symposium, we have over 700 people registered. And so you might be wondering, who is it around the room? Who are you in the room with? So our sponsors, of course, we're very grateful for their support, their sustained support for over 12 years, ExxonMobil, DuPont, GE, Schlumberger, and Bank of America. So many members of those companies, many faculty investigators, grad students and postdocs, our invited speakers and experts, the entrepreneurial community. We have a huge advantage here at Stanford because we're immersed in the heart of Silicon Valley. And finally, we have many members of the general public who regularly participate in our events and spread the important word about all the progress that's being made. So with that, I just want to thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoy the meeting, and if there's anything that we can do to help, please let us know. Thank you very much.